rather than your own.
Yeah, you had an ancestor born in French Guiana.
Exactly, yes. But, you know, it turns out I've just got this sort of circle around England, Scotland, Wales, which is a little bit insensitive, I thought, because those are 3 different countries, really. And the only interesting thing is about 1,000 years ago, some Vikings came, and I basically just sort of, obviously my ancestors just sort of ploughed the fields for 1,000 years. So, yeah, I'm so white, I'm going to go gluten-free. You know, I'm going to see every film at the Wellington Film Festival, buy a Mini Cooper.
Still a solid sort of lineage, though.
Well, yeah, yes, that's right.
Solid but conservative.
I was a bit disappointed that it didn't distinguish enough. And even there is a couple of percent of something vaguely interesting there, which is I think 3%, you know, Italian Greek. And they said Italian Greek, and I'm thinking, how insensitive is that? Do they not realise that the Italians and the Greeks are different? But yes, and I realise that people do this because they desperately don't want to be seen as so incredibly monocultural and white. But yeah, I'm the whitest person I know, except for Stephen. I think he's probably whiter than me.
Josie Pagani, Stephen Franks.
Oh, that'd be more interesting than the little rant I was going to have about the people who are so particular about Maori pronunciation and feel so good and so snobbily virtuous in getting something exactly right, but torch in English or don't know the difference between deny, refute, rebut, reject or repudiate. A whole lot of language schools getting lost, and I was really driven to that, or struck by that, by meeting Dame Iratana Tawhiwharengi, who's the founder of Kohanga, and she just had such beautiful diction and such a magnificent vocabulary, and at age 89 was a delight to listen to. And I thought, I'm listening to New Zealand politicians, Jacinda's guilty of it, Helen Clark used to be guilty of it. They deliberately dumb themselves down in a sort of attempt to, I think, curry favour as if they're working class when they're not. And a young Maori often adopt a kind of half black influence rap talk, and I was thinking, in Maori Language Week, when they're making such a to-do about whether you can say otaki instead of otaki, surely someone sees a slight amount of hypocrisy in the way they treat their own English without precision.
But I mean, isn't that the fact that Pākehā can be quite good at making other Pākehā feel bad about not pronouncing something right, and some people.
Hami Piripi of the Maori Language Commission, when I was an MP and went and did a course, was basically said that if I couldn't use the language properly, I should shut up. Now, and then they ran this campaign saying, "Give it a go."
Yeah, but meanwhile, Stephen, Māori are just going ahead. There's generations have come after us who now speak fluent Māori.
This is the virtue signalling part of it.
No, you must make a distinction between that. This is what I'm saying.
Doing.
We all know people who make you feel like you've got to do a pūwhiri when you go and meet them for a cup of coffee.
Snobbery saying, I'm part of the in-group.
That's totally different. No, that's just Pākehā talking to Pākehā. Māori are just going ahead learning Māori. And look, there were 5,000 people who marched down the streets in Wellington the other day to celebrate Māori language.
No,
your angst about it is very old-fashioned.
My angst is about English. My angst isn't about... My angst is about the people who are snobby in Māori, but who are actually even worse snobs in English.
I think that's Trojan horse and just being uncomfortable about the fact that actually a lot of people speak Māori now, and it's great. And even my white skinny boy was in the Kapahaka group.
You can keep arguing between yourselves. I love a unity of opinion on that.
Just unity is a great thing, Jim.
It is. Josie Pagani, Stephen Franks, thank you both so much for today. And here's John Campbell in Checkpoint.
Ko te mai rā, I hoa mā he kōrero, kei te haere, he kaupapa, kei te karawhiua, kia ora te reo Māori. That was Māori, now some English for Stephen Franks. Tonight on Checkpoint, I spy with my little eye somebody teaching English. When did Jian Yang tell the National Party he taught would-be spies in China so they could monitor communications? Labor makes a sudden and dramatic shift in its tax strategy. Grant Robertson joins us live. The Hawke's Bay DHB investigates the death in agony of a 93-year-old man less than 24 hours after he was sent home from hospital with a blocked bowel. Pensioners living in poverty. We know Auckland accommodation is expensive, but we're in the Bay of Plenty with 69-year-old Lynette, who's living out her retirement in a caravan in a holiday park.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The election campaign has taken another turn, with Labour changing its approach to parts of its tax policy. In an attempt to counter attacks from National, a Labour government would now seek a mandate for any new property taxes resulting from its tax working group. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
National's been taking a strong line against the array of new taxes a Labour government could introduce. In response to a dip in the polls and public feedback, Labour has abandoned its option of introducing a capital gains or land tax, excluding the family home, during a first term. Instead, it would legislate for any new taxes recommended by the working group, but would then take any changes to the 2020 election. Labour says National continues to spread misinformation about other taxes, including that Labour would hike income tax. While Labour would ditch National's planned tax cuts, it says it would deliver other tax benefits through working for families. This is Jane Patterson.
The Green Party says National's plan to sell state-owned farms to young farmers is a desperate and risky ploy to win a few more rural votes. National's promising to sell around 100 Landcorp farms to young farmers after they've worked the land for 5 to 10 years. The party can't guarantee the farms won't be resold to foreign investors. The Greens' primary industry spokesperson, Eugenie Sage, says the plan is hugely risky and sounds like a repeat of the previous asset sales program.
National seems desperate to get a few more votes and is buying them effectively from the rural community. It's a nonsense to say that young farmers will be buying these properties. They will end up in the hands of overseas investors and institutional investors, as happened with the sell-down of our power companies.
Green MP Eugenie Sage. Kiwi Rail says it's already moved to increase the frequency of drug and alcohol testing after one of its workers tested positive for methamphetamine and put railway workers at risk from an oncoming train. It follows the finding of an inquiry by the Transport Accident Investigation Commission about an incident in December 2015. The Take report says track maintenance workers were replacing sleepers on a bridge between Mananui and Taumaranui on the North Island main trunk line. 4 freight trains were halted to ensure their safety, but a passenger train carried on towards the worksite. It was able to stop 72 metres short of the bridge and no one was hurt. The Commission report said the rail protection officer at the site should have stopped the passenger train from getting as far as it did. It says it's unacceptable under any circumstances for workers to be affected by performance-impairing substances. Officials suspect an electric short circuit or burning mosquito coil could have caused a fire which has killed at least 25 people at an Islamic school in the Malaysian capital of Kuala Lumpur. The blaze broke out early in the morning and almost all the victims are students. CNN correspondent King Chai is outside.
It is a boarding school in a suburb just outside of the Kuala Lumpur city centre. And from what we can understand, most of the students here are aged between 13 to 17, and the fire broke out at the sleeping quarters of the students.
King Chai says authorities have said the religious school did not have a certificate of fitness to operate. An Otago Regional Councillor says confirming lake snow as a foreign invader changes nothing. Landcare research has found the algal slime Lindavia intermedia, which is spreading through South Island lakes, matches algae in a lake in the western United States. The algae were first found in Lake Wanaka in 2004. Michael Laws says he's not impressed at the finding.
Well done. You know, it came from overseas. Fantastic. That really isn't the issue. The issue is, what are you going to do to confront it where it is and in other alpine lakes?
Michael Laws says he fears the Regional Council will use the finding as another excuse to palm the lake snow problem off to other agencies. The 100 protesters occupying the Canterbury Regional Council offices are due to leave the building about now. The Greenpeace organised occupation saw the protesters set up in the lobby, hanging banners, singing songs and making speeches. The group says it holds the government-appointed commissioners at the council responsible for the state of Canterbury's waterways. It's coming up to 5 past 5. Sport, and he may be an international newbie, but All Blacks prop Kane Hames says he's more than ready to tackle the South African forward pack on Saturday. Hames was only called into the All Blacks squad this week as a cover for the injured Joe Moody, but has been named in the starting 15, having played just 2 tests previously, both of which were off the bench. Despite his limited time with the side, Hames says the coaching staff have convinced him he's up to the job.
When you're on the outside and you make your goals and you have your dreams and you work towards wanting to be an All Black, it's intimidating. But once you're in the environment, it's probably the most special environment in the world. It's not an earn your place boy type mentality. It's you're here to perform, and we trust you to perform.
All Black Israel Dag may well have played his last game of the year, succumbing to an ongoing knee problem. Dag wasn't considered for this Saturday's test, with coach Steve Hansen saying he may need a lengthy spell from the game. Heavyweight boxing champion Joseph Parker says officials have failed to appoint a neutral referee for his upcoming world title defence. Parker will defend his world heavyweight WBO title against Hughie Fury in Manchester next weekend. The British Boxing Board of Control has named British referee Terry O'Connor, the same official who was in charge of Hughie Fury's last 2 bouts, to control the fight. Parker says it's a hometown appointment. And the Warriors have secured Brisbane Broncos and Kiwis prop Adam Blair in a $2.5 million deal, according to Australian newspaper The Courier Mail. That's the news.
Dire straits for Rohingya Muslims.
The conditions here are pitiful. People are living in very degraded circumstances.
The Silver Ferns are the champions.
They won the Quad Series. They have now won the Tiny Jamison. So now we're moving on to the Constellation Cup.
The Winston Peters musical.
Define what do you mean, what do I want?
What do you want
from the song? What do you need? What do you want? What do you get?
Music to the ears. Morning Report with Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, why do today what we can put off till tomorrow? The art of greater self-control when it comes to procrastination. And after 10, Wellington chocolatier Marie Momont, who's bringing the flavour of a Brazilian superfruit to her high-end chocolate brand and employing prisoners to package it. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Mostly cloudy with patchy drizzle in the west. Showers developing tomorrow afternoon, turning to rain from evening. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Fine, high cloud increasing tomorrow and late rain for southern Wairarapa. Whanganui and Manawatu, cloudy periods today with isolated drizzle. Mainly fine tomorrow but rain at night. Horowhenua to Wellington, cloud increasing, northerlies rising to gale tomorrow and rain developing tomorrow evening. Nelson and Marlborough, mostly fine today, apart from isolated drizzle about western Nelson and the Marlborough Sounds, rain developing tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago, high cloud at times, a period of rain in the west tomorrow and northwest gales for inland Canterbury. Southland, cloudy periods, a few brief falls of rain. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain becoming widespread this evening and overnight with heavy falls, then turning to showers later tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Welcome to the program, everyone. Coming up, the high cost of accommodation and paying for it on the pension. Sent home with a blocked bowel. He died of a blocked bowel the next day. And the Whakatane District Council says it needs more than $14 million to buy properties at risk from deadly debris. Te Matata and much more tonight on Checkpoint. Thank you for joining us. Labor has made a sudden and dramatic shift in its tax strategy in a bid to neutralise National's attacks. The party now says it would wait until a second term of a Labor government before implementing any changes from its tax working group. Grant Robertson will join us live later on Checkpoint. But first, here's our political reporter, Craig McCulloch.
It was a big call by Jacinda Ardern after she took over the leadership to open the door to a potential tax overhaul in Labour's first term. And without certainty of what that could look like, in also came a major attack campaign.
There's only one way to stop Labour's taxes: Party Vote National.
Labour today slammed that door shut, promising any changes recommended by its tax working group won't come into effect until after the 2020 election.
People will go to the polls knowing exactly what I intend.
The sudden backdown comes after a poll this week put Labour well behind National, suggesting some of the mud on tax was starting to stick.
There certainly has been an environment of scaremongering, but I also have had feedback that people want that certainty. So we've balanced the urgency we feel around tackling the housing crisis with also providing certainty for people.
So here's what's now on the table.
Everyone ready?
Labor won't increase income tax, GST or corporate tax. It won't introduce an inheritance tax, and any capital gains or land tax won't come in until after 2020 and never on the family home.
We will have done the work, we will have passed the legislation, but nobody will be paying any tax as a result of the working group's outcomes until the 1st of April 2021.
Labor's finance spokesperson, Grant Robertson. What it will do is bring in a water royalty on commercial users, mainly farmers and water bottlers. That amount won't be finalised until Labor becomes government, but it has suggested 1 or 2 cents for every 1,000 litres of water. It'll also whack a $25 levy on international tourists and bring in a regional fuel tax in Auckland.
The National Party have been spinning lies that Labor is increasing personal taxes. We are not. New Zealanders will not be paying more in personal income taxes in the future under a Labor government than they are today.
Any questions?
Nationals not buying it. Its leader, Bill English, says Labor's move barely changes a thing.
They've been pushed into postponing something that they really wanted to do. They've talked for years about speculation in the housing market, and it turns out now they won't follow through because they think there's a big political risk with it.
But his attack fell on deaf ears on the campaign trail today. Mr English facing a tough crowd at a pack house in Gisborne.
Hello.
In a speech to workers, he railed against Labor's tax plan, only to be immediately challenged over his government's approach to the minimum wage.
$3.75 over 9 years. Now, how would you like it if your hourly rate went up $3.75 over a period of 9 years?
Well, it would be quite a challenge. I've got no doubt about that.
I'll tell you what, it's
a
huge challenge.
And a huge challenge still for both parties in the final days of the campaign. By no means will Labor's move end the tax debate. Nationals still stressing the big difference on income tax. Its cuts would kick in next year, Labor would cancel them. Instead, Labor would put that money into health and education and boost working for families, which it says will leave 70% of families better off. For Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
And Grant Robertson will join us live later on the program, 12 minutes past 5. The Hawke's Bay DHB is investigating the death of a 93-year-old man who died in agony less than 24 hours after he was sent home with a blocked bowel. John Stacey died in his own home last month, the day after a scan at Hastings Memorial Hospital revealed his bowel was blocked yesterday. Labour leader Jacinda Ardern revealed Waikato Hospital attempted to discharge her grandfather just before midnight earlier this week. Jennifer Wells listened to that on Checkpoint last night and says it prompted her to complain to the Hawke's Bay DHB this morning about her father because she doesn't want it to happen to anyone else.
At the very end, he was diagnosed with a blocked bowel. But that wasn't until the Friday before he actually died on the Saturday. He was diagnosed at the hospital when he went for a routine scan, but he'd been very ill for a few weeks before that with vomiting, and he couldn't keep food down, and his system wasn't working at all. And the GP hadn't picked up on the fact it was a blocked bowel, but when he went for a routine scan, they found it, and he was in agony.
So he went
sent him home.
Right. He went for a routine scan at what hospital?
It was at Hastings Memorial Hospital.
Okay, and they, forgive me for interrupting, they found a blocked bowel. The scan found a blocked bowel.
That's right, yes. That was the first time the GP told me that they knew about it.
And so he had been unwell for weeks. He had been vomiting. He had had trouble eating and keeping food down. He had all sorts of issues with his bowel. He was diagnosed, formally diagnosed in hospital with a blocked bowel. And then what happened?
What happened was that they said he had a blocked bowel, and then they sent him home. Now, that week, particularly that week, he'd been very ill. Two of his friends actually decided to go and stay at his house to look after him. He was getting no sleep, he was vomiting, he was in agony, because a blocked bowel is really quite painful. And when he presented at the hospital, and I would have thought once they realised what was the cause of the whole problem, they would have admitted him. He was 93. Maybe he couldn't have bore the operation. But the point is, he died in agony at home, and he died within 24 hours. You've got to be pretty sick to die within 24 hours.
Of being discharged from a hospital after being diagnosed with a blocked bowel?
Yes.
Forgive me, because this is a tough question for you to answer as his daughter, but what sort of death did he have?
He would have had an agonising death because, as far as I could tell, there were no painkillers. He had some codeine that he was prescribed by the GP from 3 weeks before. So obviously this was going on for quite a long time. But the fact that he couldn't eat and that he was vomiting, he would have been very dehydrated.
What do you say to the DHB that sent him home?
What bothers me is years ago it would have been something unusual, somebody falling through the cracks. What bothers me now is this is becoming the new normal. This is just not a one-off. This seems to be happening a lot, that people that are presenting themselves to the hospital are not being taken care of.
Jennifer, obviously we've been to the Hawke's Bay District Health Board. Did the Hawke's Bay District Health Board talk to you about whether or not you might go to the media?
They did speak to me about going. They didn't at first. The doctor actually spoke as though he was answering my complaint, which I'd only sent this morning, which I thought was very strange. I let him just discuss things, and then he brought in the media and said, we can't actually stop you from talking to the media, but we are very protective of you and your family. And it was more or less, it was cased in, you know, it might not be a good idea, blah-de-blah. But in actual fact, they're protecting themselves. And
so do you feel they were trying to dissuade you from going to the media?
Oh, yes. Yes.
And whose interests do you think they were acting in when they tried to dissuade you from going to the media? You and your dad's?
I actually said to the doctor, you're protecting yourself, you're not protecting the family. And the reason that I'm doing this is so hopefully it doesn't happen to other people. I know that's a cliche, but it happens to be true.
That's Jennifer Wells, the daughter of the man who died of a blocked bowel a day after being sent home with a blocked bowel. Nobody from the Hawke's Bay DHB has been available to be interviewed, but in a statement to us, its Acting Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Russell Wills, offered his condolences to Jennifer and her family. He said he'd only received a complaint this morning and would, quote, investigate this thoroughly as a sentinel event. We will report back on what that investigation finds. 17 minutes past 5, coming up to 18 minutes past 5, you're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Coming up on the program, the National Party can't guarantee that Landcorp farms it sells off won't end up in foreign hands. Pensioners in poverty with rents rising. As a single person, how difficult is it to live off the pension? And Dr. Jian Yang, what did he tell the National Party and when? We'd love your feedback. Anything on the program that you want to talk about, you can text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and you can email us checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. The number of people suspected to have died from synthetic drugs has now risen to around 20 as the police confirm a dangerous chemical being used in the drug. Recent deaths, 3 of them, including 2 this week in West Auckland, have been linked to the drug, and the death of a 21-year-old fielding man is also being investigated. As Tom Furley reports, St John Ambulance says its officers have handled several hundred cases believed to be linked to synthetic drugs in the last 4 months.
Since June 19, St John says ambulance officers attended 691 incidents throughout the country where patients had used psychoactive substances. At the peak, officers treated 86 patients in a single week in July, dealing with grossly disturbed people, some violent. Others suffered seizures, which, at their worst, stopped their hearts. After several deaths, mainly in Auckland, the police started working with health authorities to try to find out what's in the drugs and where they came from. The forensic chemistry manager at the Environmental Science and Research Crown Institute, Kevin Walsh, says they've been testing more and more and have found one chemical in common.
We see a lot of synthetic cannabinoids coming through the laboratory as plant material. So this is material that's to be smoked and euphoric effect achieved from that. So the common ones we're seeing now are the synthetic cannabinoids, and the most common one we're seeing at the moment is AMB fubinaca.
Detective Inspector Scott Beard says it's a dangerous chemical that has been used around the world for synthetic drugs.
AMB fubinaca generally is imported illegally into New Zealand in a powder form. It's manufactured overseas. It's a chemical compound that is added to plant material to give a synthetic drug.
He says those smoking it are taking a huge risk without knowing where it's come from or the dosage. The director of the National Poison Centre, Adam Pomelo, says AMB fubinaca was associated with a spate of similar cases labelled a zombie outbreak in New York City last year.
That's how we learn about what these things do, is just from these outbreaks. You know, there are outbreaks associated with seizures, with injury to kidneys and other organs, injuries to the heart. So there's a lot of different potential effects, and because we don't know what these things can do, it's hard to predict what the next outbreak will involve. But this specific chemical certainly has been associated with outbreaks in patients in the past.
He warns of more cases as more dangerous chemicals enter the market. Scott Beard says the police have made a significant number of seizures and arrests throughout New Zealand.
There are people out there who we need to concentrate on, the suppliers and the dealers. You know, they target the vulnerable people in our community to sell this drug to. And of course, they don't care what the effects are, they're just there to make money. And from certainly a police perspective, we are working hard to try and identify the suppliers and manufacturers of this illegal drug.
This afternoon, the police alongside the Chief Coroner have reinforced their warning about synthetic drugs. The Chief Coroner, Judge Deborah Marshall, says around 20 cases are under review where synthetic drugs were the possible cause of death. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
Poverty has become a major issue this election. Homelessness, the working poor, children go to school without any lunch and not having eaten breakfast. We've looked at all of those things on Checkpoint. Tonight we're going to look at pensioners living in poverty. With rents rising, as a single person, can you live off the pension? Lynette Haynes at Mount Maunganui says unless you live in a caravan, you can't. Our reporter Zach Fleming and cameraman Brad White paid her a visit.
We're sitting in my little caravan. It's 3.3 metres in length.
For perspective, that's barely enough for an average man to lie down, arms stretched out overhead. Standing inside, I'm thinking small, cramped, claustrophobic even. But not Lynn. Here's how she described it.
She's kind of 70s style inside. I guess you'd call the colours in here gold and green and a deep blue to grey.
She said it's comfortable, except when it's cold, which is actually every night.
But I can fill a hot water bottle. I've got an electric jug which I can use in here. Fill a hot water bottle, and I've got plenty of blankets and bedding and warm things to wear.
Lynn is 69 years old, a job seeker living in a caravan at a campground in the Bay of Plenty. She epitomises the struggle of the hard-working but non-home-owning pensioner. Yet she is the glass overflowing kind of positive.
And my dad taught me resilience, to get up and bounce back and roll with the punches, he used to say, when things didn't go right. You've got to roll with the punches, Lynn.
So how did she get here? She was working in a pharmacy when the global financial crisis hit in 2008.
I did love my job.
Made redundant, the then 60-year-old went on the job hunt. Number of applications?
Hundreds.
But she couldn't find a job, which she puts down to her age.
There was no chance. I think I got to one interview in all the hundreds of jobs that I applied for.
Then, to make matters worse, her landlord asked her to leave because his daughter needed a place to live.
My living situation has just gone slip back all the time.
Before and during all of this, Lynn was trying to get a place of her own, but...
With the global financial crisis and my job loss, the bank couldn't give me a mortgage loan, so that went down the gurgler. So I kept hopeful, and that's why I kept applying for jobs.
But hope doesn't pay the bills, and that's Lynn's problem. The cheapest one-bedroom units in Tauranga that are suitable for long-term stays, as in not just an uninsulated converted garage, go for around $300 a week. The pension is $390 a week.
Okay, I could go out tomorrow and rent a little place and hand all my income, my pension income, over to the landlord. but that means I've got nothing left for dental care, health care, keeping tyres on the car, keeping the warrant and the registration going, putting food on the table, all of those things. I just couldn't have them.
The campground has communal bathrooms and kitchen. It costs Lynn $154 a week. She was there during cyclones Cook and Debbie earlier this year. She had to take refuge in the local library.
It's deafening. I have to lock up and get in my car and go.
We can't tell you the name of the campground because it's actually illegal for Lynn to be there. The Camping Grounds Regulations Act says nobody can stay at a campground longer than 50 days. But staying there means Lynn can afford the essentials.
Just recently I had 2 single dental visits for 2 single fillings, and they were $170 each.
And what would have happened if she was in a rental unit?
I would have to go to A&E and beg for the dentist to come and fix my tooth because I'd be in agony.
Lynn told me, as far as she sees it, her choices are live in the caravan or go into debt. I asked her what she does for fun.
In terms of...
She was confused. What did I mean by fun? I asked again.
Go walking on the beach, just across the road, so that's not too far away. Hop on the bus and get a bus ride. Thanks to Winston Peters, I've got a gold bus card, which I can use locally. So I can go and walk around the city and enjoy the vista in some lovely places down on the Strand and around the city to walk, and beautiful parks. We've got beautiful parks here in Tauranga. I can go down to the Mount and enjoy Pilot Bay.
You'll notice none of these things cost money.
And go to the library, which is free to me, and contact friends and maybe meet for a cup of tea, and family when I get to see them when they're busy.
What about a movie? Dining out?
Anything that costs more than, say, $10, I've got to think twice. Restaurant meals are out for me. I can't ever get to a restaurant where I can go and sit down and be waited on. That is a no for me. And other little treats like an ice cream in a cone is nice. Basically that's really all I do.
Shopping is either the $2 shop or second-hand op shops.
So my meals consist of sausages and boiled vegetables, or...
She gave us a tour of her caravan.
Groceries in here, packets and jars, and...
The food's mostly home brand or tinned. She has a small TV with a makeshift aerial that can only get channel 1 and 2. There are no signs of extravagance or irresponsibility. No computer, no internet.
Unfortunately, well, you've got to cut your cloth to fit your pocket, and some things have to go.
And that's just how it is, she told me.
Winter's very hard when you're cooped up in a little space, very hard. And it can be a wee bit depressing. You get a wee bit depressed. And even though I've had a positive attitude, there's times when I have think, well, why me? Why is this happening to me now? Is it ever going to change? And the whole time I'm planning, well, what can I actually do to get out of it? That's the other thing, as I've sat and made notes sometimes about what can I do.
Lynn thinks there are 2 ways: get a job, which she's as yet been unable to do, or Housing New Zealand. She's on the waiting list for a state house in the Bay of Plenty area to be near her grandkids.
At my age, going to a city where you don't know anyone and having to set yourself up and start all over again, it's pretty much a no.
The Ministry for Social Development's Regional Commissioner Mike Bryant says Lynn has been on the Housing New Zealand waitlist for just over a year, and she's considered a high priority. But because she occasionally house sits for friends or acquaintances, it changes her entitlement to accommodation supplement. Mr Bryant says MSD has 123 transitional housing places in the Bay of Plenty and is currently looking for an additional 290 social housing places, including 155 one-bedrooms. Mr Bryant says MSD would look at a discretionary bond and helping Lynn with rent in advance if she wanted to move into a rental unit. Otherwise, widening her search area would help, as, quote, one-bedroom properties in Tauranga are hard to find. I asked Lynn if she ever lies awake at night, unable to sleep.
Yes, I do. Sometimes I wake up in the night and I worry, and I get up and I turn the light on and I turn the radio on. I listen to a lot of Radio New Zealand during the night. I listen to Brian and Jess, and yeah, that's become my company. Your radio station has become my company in the night when I worry. I won't ring helpline because I'm not the only one.
We hear cases like this all the time. There isn't enough money for older people to pay rent, travel, transport, eat and look after themselves.
Stephanie Clare, Chief Executive of Age Concern, says Lynn is an example of a worsening problem as home ownership levels fall.
Once upon a time, that amount of money on retirement was aimed just to supplement whatever money they, the living standards of an older person. But in today's world, it's actually paying for everything. So it doesn't actually keep up with inflation and the needs of an older person.
And we have then single people in their retirement years on national superannuation who are by any measure living in poverty.
I asked Tom O'Connor, President of Grey Power, what should Lynn do?
Sadly, there's not a lot. She needs to go to WIN.
She's on the Housing New Zealand waitlist at the moment.
Yeah, you can't live on a waitlist. We have people in dire straits in this country, and that's an indictment on a succession of governments that have allowed it to happen.
For Lynn, she's holding out hope of a state house or a job, maybe both, and that she doesn't get booted out of the campground for breaking the rules.
We live in uncertainty, and that's really a very difficult place to be. It's like a rock in a hard place.
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
The owners of the campground Lynn is living in say they turn away at least one person a day in a similar situation, asking to park their caravan permanently. And if you're wondering why Lynn isn't living with her son, he's also renting and doesn't have room for Lynn or her caravan. With Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Coming up, Nona has business news. When did Jian Yang tell the National Party he taught would-be spies English in China so they could monitor communications? Tragedy in the aftermath of Hurricane Irma after 8 elderly residents die in their sweltering retirement home north of Miami, which is still without power after the monster storm. And Grant Robertson joins us to discuss Labour's tax repositioning. But first, here's Katrina Batten with the headlines.
The election campaign has taken another turn, with Labor changing its approach to parts of its tax policy. In an attempt to counter attacks from National, a Labor government would now seek a mandate for any new property taxes resulting from its tax working group. It's abandoned its options of introducing a capital gains or land tax, excluding the family home during a first term. Instead, it would legislate for any new taxes, but would then take any changes to the 2020 election. The daughter of a 93-year-old man who died in pain a day after being sent home from Hastings Memorial Hospital with a blocked bowel says she can't understand why he was discharged. John Stacey died at home last month, the day after a scan revealed his bowel was blocked. His daughter, Jennifer Wells, told Checkpoint her father had been ill for weeks, and with such a serious diagnosis, she would have expected him to be admitted. The Green Party says National's plan to sell state-owned farms to young farmers is a desperate and risky ploy to win a few more rural votes. National's promising to sell around 100 Landcorp farms to young farmers after they've worked the land for 5 to 10 years. Kiwi Rail says it's already increased the frequency of drug and alcohol testing after a railway worker who tested positive for methamphetamine put other workers at risk from an oncoming train. The Transport Accident Investigation Commission has released its report about the incident in December 2015. Officials suspect an electrical short circuit or burning mosquito coil could have caused a fire that killed at least 25 people at an Islamic school in the Malaysian capital of Kuala Lumpur. The blaze broke out early in the morning and almost all the victims are students. A countrywide second-hand car dealership is being made to audit the past 6 years of its wage payments after an investigation found it could owe workers more than $250,000. The Employment Relations Authority carried out the investigation into Too Cheap Cars Limited. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thank you so much, Katrina. Let's turn to business news with Nona Peltier, who is sitting beside me in the Auckland studio. Hi, Nona.
Hello.
Consumer confidence has hit a 3-year high.
Yeah, it's a high.
What's driving that?
Well, I think it's just the it's more the things that aren't depressing it. The elections looming, that doesn't seem to be having much of an effect. The housing market has evened out. That's not having much of an effect. In fact, the index rose more than 3 points, 3.5 points to 129.9. So, you know, that's a very high level. People are as confident as they were before the global financial crisis. So, yeah.
Wow, 9 years ago.
Yes, yeah, pretty much. Very, very strong. And so I think, you know, if this isn't going to put people off, all the uncertainty ahead of an election, what will, we'll see.
Gosh, that's fascinating. We're quite tight tonight, and I said, no, don't muck about. And by God, you took me at my word, Nona.
I did.
We're trying to jam everything in. Thanks, Nona. What happened on the markets today?
Well, we had some news from the retirement village operator Somerset, and they've bought some land in Wellington, pretty central Wellington, which they were very pleased about because they've been shopping around for land there to build a retirement village for some time with no luck. They've got one now, and it's going to also have a dementia care unit. That's a memory care facility. And these are becoming quite popular. All of their new facilities are going to have this, so they were very excited. And their share price rose by 2%, 10 cents up to $5.10. Our market fell 8 points, not exactly sure why. That's not much of a fall, to 7,819, still quite high. The dollar was steady, 72.5 US cents, 90.5 Australian, and 54.9 British pounds.
Nona Peltier, thank you very much indeed. We turn now to the story of John Yang, the National Party List MP who once taught English to trainee spies. When Newsroom broke the story yesterday, the National Party and Dr. Yang himself responded by saying his work history was declared and widely known. Bill English said that to me on air here last night. But Checkpoint has spent the day searching for any public record of an explicit declaration about Dr. Yang's work history teaching English to students in China so they could use it to monitor communications. Now, we couldn't find that, and we welcome documentary evidence of its existence. Do email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz and we will read it out on air. We have been sent a CV from 2012, but Dr. Yang became an MP in 2011, and we wanted to know what National had been told prior to his selection. We also wanted to know what the SIS has determined about Dr. Yang. We're waiting for those answers, although no one would talk to us today.
This is a smear campaign by nameless people who are out to damage me and the National Party 10 days from an election.
John Yang, yesterday afternoon. He wasn't available to be interviewed by Checkpoint today, despite the fact we approached him this morning and said we could pre-record or do it live, effectively giving him an 8-hour window. But yesterday he was resolute about what he had told the National Party.
From the very beginning, I made it clear to the party that I have this military background.
But the Newsroom story raised Dr. Yang's background in intelligence gathering, and it's difficult to find evidence of this being explicitly on the public record. So, when he repeated,
I made it very clear, my military background.
The issue became one of detail. How much did he tell? To whom? And when?
Well, this is very complicated.
So let's go through it detail by detail. What's not in dispute is that Dr. Yang was a lecturer at Luoyang PLA University of Foreign Languages. What was he lecturing in?
English.
As in English language. And in part, as was revealed following a question by Newsroom yesterday, his students were learning English so they could monitor telecommunications.
That's correct.
That China does such work is not remotely surprising in general terms. Indeed, New Zealand recently and controversially granted citizenship to occasional visitor Peter Thiel, whose company Palantir has created some of the most sophisticated surveillance software the world has ever seen. Governments spy. China and America have a state-backed spying industry. The question for Dr. Yang to answer was, who did he tell and how much did he tell them?
I'm honest. I'm very honest. So at the universities, you just learn language.
But what did Dr. Yang tell the National Party about what that English language was to be used for? When we asked for an interview, the polite email declining had a CV attached, provided, quote, to New Zealand's embassy in China in 2012. The CV is certainly comprehensive to the point of being exhaustive, and it clearly lists his places of work in China. But Dr Yang became an MP in 2011, so a 2012 CV doesn't address his transparency in the period prior to his placement in an electable position on the National Party list. Did he tell anyone he taught trainee spies English? And can he see how people might have been interested in that?
I can understand people can be concerned because they do not understand the Chinese system. But once they understand the system, they should be assured that this is nothing really you should be concerned about.
That's Dr Jian Yang. We have got in requests for more information through both official and unofficial channels, and we will indeed report back. There have been many stories of destruction and heartbreak in the wake of Hurricane Irma, but today a harrowing tragedy unfolded at a nursing home in Florida. 8 elderly residents died after spending 3 days inside their sweltering residential care facility north of Miami when Irma knocked out power and air conditioning. A criminal investigation has now been launched, but some are laying the blame squarely on power and county officials. Elizabeth Brown reports.
Temperatures in Broward County have been a humid 32 degrees in the days since Irma battered Florida. When firefighters and ambulance staff responded to an emergency call at the rehabilitation centre at Hollywood Hills, they found 3 people dead inside the building. Its second floor was described as extremely hot. All 115 residents were evacuated. Dozens were taken to a hospital, ironically across the road, where another 5 died. Hospital emergency doctor Randy Katz was one of the first to arrive.
The scene was chaotic when I arrived. We mobilized at least 50 to 100 of our employees that left the hospital, ran down the street, and pulled all of these patients out of the facility and made sure that they got to a safe place.
Local Police Chief Thomas Sanchez says a full investigation is now underway.
Right now the building has been sealed off and we're conducting a criminal investigation inside. We believe at this time they may be related to the loss of power and the storm. But we're conducting a criminal investigation, not ruling anything out at this time.
Ellie Pina knows the home well. Her mother is a resident and she's now one of those recovering in hospital. Ms Pina says she visited her mother the day after the hurricane struck. She says she noticed the rooms were very hot and staff were trying to move residents into a central area to cool them down with portable air conditioning units and fans run off a generator. She says she rang the power company, Florida Power and Light, several times to alert them to the problem, but no help came.
The response was nothing. We'll take care of it. We have others. We'll be there. And I kept telling them, especially yesterday, this is a life and death matter. They're in bad condition over there. You need to get over there.
Ellie Pina says she also called the 911 emergency number and was told to call the power company again. She got the same response.
Called again, Florida Power and Light. And I got the same thing, like they were reading a script. Okay, I said, you need to get over there. It's life and death matter. If they would have gone yesterday, this wouldn't have happened. This was a crime committed by Florida Power and Light and the officials of Broward County.
A Florida senator has described the deaths as inexcusable. Bill Nelson says he's in no doubt the deaths could have been prevented.
I think it is an emerging scandal of gargantuan proportions with 8 deaths already. Now the question is to prevent this from happening in other nursing homes, some of which are out in rural areas.
Millions of people are still without power in Florida and have been told it could be another 3 or 4 days before it's restored. That includes 150 rest homes and assisted living facilities in the wider Miami area. Police Chief Thomas Sanchez says they are now all being checked.
As a precautionary measure, we've assigned police officers to go check all the other 42 assisted living facilities and nursing homes throughout the city to make sure that they're in sufficient care of the elderly.
The nursing home at the centre of the tragedy has yet to comment. Meanwhile, the overall death toll from Hurricane Irma in the US and the Caribbean has now risen to 81, with several hard-hit Caribbean islands accounting for more than half the fatalities. For Checkpoint, Elizabeth Brown.
Home again, the Whakatane District Council says it needs more than $14 million to buy properties at risk from deadly debris flows at Matata in the Bay of Plenty. But many affected property owners say that massively undervalues their homes and sections, and some would prefer to stay. Our reporter Robin Martin has more.
In May 2005, a torrential downpour washed boulders, logs and other debris down the flooded Awatariki stream, destroying 27 homes and racking up a bill of $20 million. Residents were allowed back into the area in 2006 because the council believed it could build a structure to contain debris in a similar event. But 6 years later it gave up on that idea, saying the area was a high loss of life risk zone and managed retreat was the only viable option. Now, an indicative business case says buying the 16 homes and 18 sections affected will cost $14.2 million. Clem Elliott Drive resident Grant Wilkins says the council's offer for his home is a joke.
The offer they made us is absolutely insane. I mean, my section alone, if I was to buy my section on the coastline anywhere along this whole area, I'm looking at $500,000 to $600,000 for that section alone. They're basically telling me that my section is worth $280,000. I mean, my property's insured for over $600,000, and in my view, underinsured.
Mr Wilkins' neighbour, Rachel Wiley, is also unimpressed.
But we didn't feel that those prices were enough, given that we didn't want to move in the first instance. And if you want to make somebody move, you have to be able to offer them a similar sort of property in a similar sort of location, and the money they were offering wasn't going to anywhere near cover that.
If the property owners do not accept the offer, the council has signalled it will ask the Bay of Plenty Regional Council for a plan change to extinguish existing property rights. An unprecedented move under the Resource Management Act, it could force property owners off their land. Mr Wilkins thinks that is where things are headed.
My view is, mate, they're going to push it. They're going to get it through. I mean, we're sort of resigned to that fact. Obviously, none of us want to leave where we are. But then what it really comes down to is, what's the cost of us reinstating our own properties and land? And I mean, to be honest, mate, it's a real mind screw for us.
The District Council's Strategic Projects Manager, Jeff Farrell, says it has tried to be fair, and independent assessors valued the properties at 2016 prices as if there was no flood risk.
Well, I think the process that's gone through at the moment has been very robust. As I said, a lot of the property owners considered the valuations were very fair. Some didn't. The key thing is that offer can be challenged, and independent valuers can be brought in.
Mr Farrell says the council cannot afford to buy the properties itself and will approach the government and regional council for help. He says if the money is made available but property owners still refuse to leave, their fate will eventually be out of the district council's hands.
If the plan change goes through and says, sorry, but there is a new rule in the regional plan that prevents residential occupation of those properties, and that is a precedent in New Zealand for that to happen under the RMA, then it will be a matter for the regional council and the landowners to work through.
The Whakatane Council wants to rezone the affected area in its district plan, and it expects to take submissions on this in October, and public hearings are slated for November-December. For Checkpoint, ko Robin Martin tēnei.
An algal slime spreading through South Island lakes has been confirmed as a biosecurity incursion from the United States. Landcare researchers identified lake snow, also known by the less lovely name of lake snot, rather wonderful in its evocation though, is the same algae found clogging nets and boats in a reservoir in Washington state. That's prompting calls for urgent biosecurity responses. Here's our Otago Southern reporter Ian Telfer.
Lake snow was first found 13 years ago, but very little's been done to deal with it. Now, research commissioned by the Otago Regional Councils matched the genetic code of the algae to samples around the world. The Council's Technical Committee Chair, Andrew Noon, says the samples match one from a US reservoir, Lake Youngs, in Washington state.
It's identical, so what that would tend to indicate the appearance of lake snow in Wanaka is by way of either transfer or it's come in as an invasive weed. It's not a New Zealand native.
The Otago University water scientist who first found the invader, Mark Schallenberg, says it confirms what he had just guessed at before.
This lake snow problem really never turned up before it showed up in Lake Wanaka and was reported by fishermen in the early 2000s. So I think many of us suspected that it probably was a species that has come in recently, but we didn't know for sure.
Dr. Schellenberg says his best guess is that lake snow came in on unclean fishing gear like waders or footwear, in the same way as another invader, Didimo. Andrew Noon says finding lake snow as a biosecurity invader is a game changer, and says it means biosecurity officials from the Ministry for Primary Industries need to get much more involved.
We're not stepping back from our responsibilities, but we'd be looking for greater support and greater lead from central government in light of that land care research.
Mark Schellenberg agrees it makes sense to take a national approach.
You know, it is spreading from lake to lake, and so if there's any way to control it or stop it, you know, that really needs to be investigated.
But a regional councillor for the Central Lakes area, Michael Laws, says his response when he found out was whoop-de-doo. Mr. Laws says the finding changes nothing.
Well done. You know, it came from overseas. Fantastic. That really isn't the issue. The issue is, what are you going to do to confront it where it is and in other alpine lakes?
The Ministry for Primary Industries says there are no known tools yet for managing lake snow, so it's focusing on stopping its spread by public education campaigns with lake users. It says it's working with other agencies to work out what to do long term. The Regional Council's calling a public meeting on October the 4th in Wanaka to discuss the findings and what people want done next. I o te poti, more Checkpoint, ko Ian Telfer, tēnei.
Waikato Hospital's confirmed that a baby died during a birth at the hospital a year ago, but says it was not solely due to the fact a planned caesarean section was delayed. It follows a report today that the death followed a caesarean section for the woman being put off after a more urgent case arose. But the hospital says there were many factors involved in the case. Our health correspondent Karen Brown has more.
In a report today, the New Zealand Herald says a baby died during birth after the mother was bumped from having her elective or non-urgent caesarean section at least once because an emergency C-section took priority. The Waikato District Health Board's Clinical Director of Quality and Patient Safety, Doug Stevenson, says it occurred a year ago. He would not discuss details, including the cause of death.
A child in utero, while still in the womb, did die. Very unfortunate, and it's led to a review of not just that situation, but in general, it led to a review of the processes in and around caesarean sections in general.
Dr. Stevenson says at that time all C-sections were done in an operating theatre in the delivery suite area. He says that since last December, all non-urgent or planned C-section procedures take place in the hospital's main operating theatres, while unplanned or urgent C-sections are done in the delivery suite. Dr. Stevenson says that's the best approach and it is safe for mothers and babies.
We believe in doing this. Our mothers and our babies are safe, and we feel quite confident that this has been a very good approach for us.
He says the baby's death led to internal and external reviews, which the DHB will not release for privacy reasons. But he insists the baby's death was part of a wider, far more complex issue.
There were a series of events that occurred. There were multiple different things that occurred that led to this obvious extremely tragic event. It is absolutely not as simple as a delayed caesarean section, okay? It's just not.
Regardless of the root cause, a board member, Dave McPherson, is upset that he wasn't told about the case.
That was a very serious incident at the hospital, and there was nothing in any of our meetings about it. I've gone back and double-checked to make sure that I hadn't missed something in a meeting, but no, we've told nothing.
He says it adds to his view that there is a culture of secrecy at the DHB.
It's a culture of only giving out good news and hiding the bad news, which makes it very difficult for us to actually do anything to improve difficult situations.
Meanwhile, Dr. Stevenson says discussion continues at the DHB about operating theatre issues as part of a wider theatre project. He says decisions will be made by the end of the year over whether a single designated operating theatre is needed for all non-urgent C-sections instead of being done in any of 3 theatres in the main operating area currently. As well, where semi-urgent C-sections should be done in the delivery suite area or main theatre space will also be decided. Mō te hotaka o te ahi, ko Karen Brown tēnei.
It's coming up to 6 minutes to 6. Lots of feedback coming in, particularly about 2 stories we've covered tonight. One of them, Lynn, living in her caravan, done by Zach Fleming and our cameraman Bradley White. Heartbreaking story about Lynn from Zach. What has happened to this country? And greedy people are worried about paying a bit more tax. Just heartbreaking, says Rachel. Maria says, Checkpoint. Hi, John. Thank you for an always interesting On the Pulse program. Our pleasure, Maria. As a 70-year-old single woman, I am by virtue of kindness of son and daughter-in-law living in a house which I rent from them. If it wasn't for this scenario, I doubt I could afford to pay rent in this greedy and cruel, desperate world on New Zealand superannuation-only income. Thus, I'd be joining the net in a caravan park situation, or maybe I'd be fortunate enough to go onto a pensioner flat waiting list. Going about to even look at possibilities of accommodation is difficult, not owning a car due to unaffordability. And they say these wealthy baby boomers, thank you for the opportunity to respond. What an indictment on many fronts. And Vic says these are conversations we need to have pre-election. New Zealand has a history of looking after its biggest assets, its people. And what is currently happening in our country, read the widening gap between rich and poor, and the lack of conscience and compassion from a large proportion of New Zealanders is just so wrong. In fact, in some cases, criminal in the way wealth is accrued and held on to under New Zealand legal and tax systems. We need to act with our consciences. Now the need is real and people are suffering. Thank you very much, Vic. And another one has just been passed into me. I would recommend that the elderly do what we all do when we're young, house share. It makes it affordable, ensures that we have company, and ensures that if anything goes wrong, there is someone else there to call for help. Regards, Laurie. Lots more feedback coming in. We'll fit it in, hopefully, as we have time. It's 4:30 to 6. Nearly 100 protesters stormed the offices of the Canterbury Regional Council today, demanding an improvement to the region's waterways. The Greenpeace organised occupations for the protesters, setting up in the lobby, hanging bangers, singing songs and making speeches. Conan Young, our excellent Christchurch reporter, was there.
Visitors to the Canterbury Regional Council are normally required to sign in electronically and get a sticker identifying them. While that formality had to be dispensed with, there was no doubt about what protesters were here for today. Greenpeace spokesperson Jen Toop holds the government-appointed commissioners at the council responsible for the state of Canterbury's waterways.
7 years ago, the National-led government sacked the democratically elected councillors here at ECAN, and since then, all we've been given in return is more big irrigation, more cows and more polluted rivers. Today, we're occupying the foyer and we're taking our democracy back and we're standing up for our rivers.
Among the protesters was an organic dairy farmer from South Canterbury, Brian Clearwater. He says farmers need to take personal accountability for what their animals are doing to the soil.
Ideally, along with monitoring our water quantities, we would be measuring our water quality 24/7 and advertising that to the world, that we are sustainable, responsible producers of food.
Nikki Snowink travelled all the way from Springfield in mid-Canterbury to attend the occupation. She said new limits being introduced by the council restricting the amount of effluent farmers are allowed to deposit on paddocks don't go far enough.
Yeah, it's great they've put limits in, limits where we didn't have limits before, but the limits, in my view, don't really go far enough because they allow more pollution, not less.
The council is now made up of a mixture of 7 elected councillors and 6 government appointees. One of the elected members, the acting council chairperson, Steve Lowndes, says the protesters were welcome to stay.
The people who want to make their statement to us, we've provided them with tea and we've got some chairs for them. And, you know, as long as we can keep on doing our business around them today, I applaud what's happening.
Steve Lowndes says the new limits on farmers were the only option available to the council as the law currently stood.
Everybody here would like to say, you know, change land use, reduce cows. They have no powers to do that. So what we've done is worked with the RMA, which is basically controlling outputs. You can't control the inputs, but you can control the outputs, and in this case it's nitrogen, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Steve Lowndes says he agrees with the protesters on the need for a wholly elected regional council. The government has promised a fully elected council will return in 2019. In Ototahi for Checkpoint, ko Conan Young tēnei.
About 1.5 to 6, coming up Grant Robertson after 6 o'clock to talk about Labour's tax repositioning. Lots of feedback tonight, thank you. This about the story of the 93-year-old man who was sent home after having a blocked bowel diagnosed and died of a blocked bowel 24 hours later. Recent DHB failings are symptoms of the wider problem of the national government's deliberate underfunding of our health system. We cannot sit by and let this continue. Our public services are crumbling and National are buying people's compliance with an insignificant tax cut. Whatever government we end up with on September 23rd, we need to hold them to account. Providing us with functional and effective public services should not be optional. That's from Anita and Jeremy. But on the other hand, this listener or viewer says, I am sad to hear this lady make a general statement that people don't get looked after when they go to hospital. New Zealanders get very well looked after. Let's remember the doctors and nurses who work so hard, don't eat for entire shifts, go home late to their families and miss their children, all because they care and want the best outcome for their patients. Not many people realise how devastated they feel when their patients have bad outcomes. They never have the opportunity to give their account of events or how they feel to the media. It's unprofessional and just not what they do. Sorry for this lady's loss, but we really do have an exceptional health system in this country. Thank you for your feedback and thank you for listening to Checkpoint on RNZ.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening, ko Katrina Batanaho. The election campaign has taken another turn, with Labour changing its approach to parts of its tax policy. In response to a dip in the polls and public feedback, Labour has abandoned its option of introducing a capital gains or land tax, excluding the family home during a first term. Instead, it would legislate for any new taxes, but would then take any changes to the 2020 election. Labour says National continues to spread misinformation about other taxes, including that Labour would hike income tax. While Labour would ditch National's planned tax cuts, it says it would deliver other tax benefits through working for families. The Green Party says National's plan to sell state-owned farms to young farmers is a desperate and risky ploy to win a few more votes. National is promising to sell about 100 Landcorp properties to young farmers after they've worked the land for 5 to 10 years. But the party can't guarantee the farms won't be resold to foreign investors. Anusha Bradley reports.
National says there'll be no limit on the farmers on selling the land once they own it. The Greens' primary industries spokesperson Eugenie Sage says the plan is hugely risky and a desperate attempt by National to buy more votes from the rural community. Labour is questioning why the policy is being announced just 10 days from the election without any consultation with Māori about land that's subject to treaty claims and first right of refusal. But an agribusiness accountant, Peter Alexander, supports the idea. He says young couples would probably work the farms better than Landcorp. Ko Anusha Bradley, aho.
The Waikato District Health Board says a series of issues were involved in the tragic death of a baby during a birth a year ago. It's been reported today the mother's non-urgent caesarean was postponed because of an urgent case. The DHB's Clinical Director of Quality and Patient Safety, Doug Stevenson, says the death occurred while the baby was in its mother's womb. He says privacy prevents him disclosing the cause, but the delays to the mother's C-section were one factor among many.
There were a series of events that occurred. There were multiple different things that occurred that led to this obvious, extremely tragic event. It is absolutely not as simple as a delayed cesarean section, okay? It's just not.
Dr. Doug Stevenson. The Chief Coroner has been investigating 20 deaths that may have been a result of synthetic drugs. There have been 2 linked to the drug this week alone in West Auckland, and the death of a 21-year-old fielding man is also being investigated. Detective Inspector Scott Baird says the majority of drugs tested have confirmed the presence of the dangerous chemical A&B fubinaca. He says the police need the public's help in finding those selling and making it.
There are people out there who we need to concentrate on, the suppliers and the dealers. You know, they target the vulnerable people in our community to sell this drug to. And, of course, they don't care what the effects are. They're just there to make money.
Detective Inspector Scott Baird. The 100 protesters occupying the Canterbury Regional Council offices have now left the building peacefully. The Greenpeace organised occupation saw the protesters set up in the lobby, hanging banners, singing songs and making speeches. The group holds the government-appointed commissioners at the council responsible for the state of Canterbury's waterways. A second-hand car dealer with branches nationwide has been ordered to pay a $70,000 penalty after it was found to be underpaying some of its workers. The Employment Relations Authority says Too Cheap Cars Limited could be liable for more than $250,000 in arrears following an investigation. It says there were serious breaches of the minimum wage, holiday pay and record keeping. After looking into 12 of the 83 employees' circumstances, the inspectorate found they were owed more than $20,000 of entitlements, which have since been paid. Some of the employees were migrant workers, and Too Cheap Cars can't recruit migrants for 2 years. A second external audit is taking place. The Cassini spacecraft is making its final plunge into Saturn, taking its last pictures of the planet, its rings and its moons. The Cassini mission has made some extraordinary discoveries about the ring planet over the past 13 years. They include images of water shooting up through the icy surface of one of its moons, where scientists believe simple life forms may be able to exist. NASA's Cassini project manager Earl Mays says it's sad to see the mission coming to a close.
We set out to do something at Saturn. We did it. We did it extremely well, and we delivered more and more. And we've left the world informed, but still wondering. I couldn't ask for more. We got to go back. We know it.
Cassini project manager Earl Mays. A deep space antenna in the Australian capital, Canberra, will capture the final 9 hours of signals from Cassini. It's 6:05. Sport. All Black Israel Dag may have played his last game of the year, succumbing to an ongoing knee problem. Doug wasn't considered for Saturday's test against South Africa, with coach Steve Hansen saying Dag may need a lengthy spell from the game. The 29-year-old injured his knee while playing for the Crusaders in March and had an operation before returning to the field in late May. After a win over Argentina last week, when Dag had to come off, he described his knee problem as simply a case of old man syndrome, but now seems somewhat more serious than that. Golfer Lydia Ko heads into the major final of the year with high hopes in what has been so far an underwhelming 12 months. Ko hasn't won a tournament in more than a year, but finished second in last weekend's LPGA event. The Evian Championship in France was the venue of Ko's first major victory in 2015. She's tried to simplify her putting technique and says it seems to have paid off. Lydia Ko. Real Madrid had made an emphatic start to the defence of the Champions League football title with a 3-0 home win over Apoel Nicosia of Cyprus. Tottenham also got off to a strong start with a 3-1 win over Borussia Dortmund. Manchester City beat Dutch side Feyenoord 4-0, while Liverpool drew 2-2 with Sevilla at Anfield. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, supersizing our houses, which not only makes them more expensive to build and buy, but more expensive to heat. We have a window on the world of new adventures in food production, including a new insect-based cooking oil. Maybe that'll keep a lid on the price of butter. While this week's cultural ambassador Kirsten Zemke offers us a few sonic adventures from the world of hip-hop on Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Te reo irarangi o Aotearoa, funded through New Zealand On Air. Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland through Taranaki, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Mostly cloudy with patchy drizzle in the west, showers developing tomorrow afternoon, turning to rain from evening. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine, high cloud increasing tomorrow and late rain for southern Wairarapa. Whanganui and Manawatu, cloudy periods today with isolated drizzle, mainly fine tomorrow but rain at night. Horowhenua to Wellington, cloud increasing, northerlies rising to gale tomorrow and rain developing tomorrow evening. Nelson and Marlborough mostly fine today, apart from isolated drizzle about western Nelson and the Marlborough Sounds. Rain developing tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago, high cloud at times, a period of rain in the west tomorrow and northwest gales for inland Canterbury. Southland, cloudy periods, a few brief falls of rain. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain becoming widespread this evening and overnight, with heavy falls then turning to showers later tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Labor has done a U-turn on Jacinda Ardern's captain's call to implement any tax changes in the first term of government, saying it's listened to voters who want certainty under attack from National. We've discussed that at length. Labor has changed its strategy on how it would carry out its proposed tax plan. It now says that if it leads the next government, the recommendations of its tax working group would not be introduced until after the 2020 election. Effectively, it would seek a mandate for them. Labor's finance spokesperson Grant Robertson joins us now live from Wellington. Are you there?
I am, John. Yep, not quite Wellington, side of the road in Carpety.
Oh, well, it's nice to have you with us, and I understand you've got a debate with Stephen Joyce in the next few minutes, have you?
We do, yes. So hence have to get back on the road and get back to Wellington for that. It'll be a good experience to spend some time with Stephen again.
Yes, I know you enjoy each other's company very much, so we won't keep you. Hey, just before you move on, Colmar Brunton, Labor 44+1, National 40+1, the Greens 7 up 2. That's a material movement because 7 and 44 is 51, so you could govern with the Greens if this Colmar Brunton is right. What's your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction is that polls bounce around, don't they? We always look to see the trend in polls, and seeing the trend upwards there for us is good, and we're happy about that. But we just know that this is an election with lots of twists and turns and volatility, and we have to keep working hard for the next 8 and 9 days. Yeah, that V word is getting a lot of use, isn't it? And the Reid Research, the News Hub poll of last week had the Nats quite a long way in front. So, do you have a sense? What's Labor's polling telling you? Do you have a sense of where you're actually sitting? It's close. That's the sense that I have, and I don't just have that from polls either. I have it from being out there on the election trail and talking with voters and listening to their concerns. And sorry to interrupt. It's going to be very close. John. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but when you said listening to their concerns, it's a timely segue because what we want to talk to you about is their concerns around their uncertainty on Labor's position on tax, right? Yeah, look, I mean, we have listened to that. I mean, obviously we see issues, particularly in terms of our housing market, but the general balance of the tax system towards speculation and not towards productivity, and we want to make sure we do the right thing there. Can I ask you, John? Yeah, absolutely. And you have to become government, right? And so that's what you're trying to do here. Can I ask you, is this what you wanted to do all along? Was your sense that you needed to get the tax working group, its findings, then go to the electorate for a mandate in 2020, and were you overridden by your new boss, Jacinda Ardern? Well, no, I mean, everybody knows what Andrew Little, his policy was, and Jacinda's been very upfront with the fact that she came in and said she wanted to reserve the right to act and to do the work. I guess I'm asking you as finance spokesperson. No, what I'm saying to you is that I back that, John. I back Jacinda on that. We've gone through a campaign, and it's very important that we understand that the work will still be done here. We do want to get on with this work of checking our tax system, making sure that it's fair, and then we'll do the work. We'll put the legislation together, but New Zealanders will get to pass their judgment on whether they want to see it implemented or not. I think that's a good, a balanced approach between getting the work done and giving New Zealanders the certainty. And ultimately, this is Jacinda's call. It's the right call, and I'm backing her. In terms of your budget, and there's been much discussion about how much money you're going to spend and whether you can afford to spend it, does this impact on revenue? In other words, are you foregoing the possibility of revenue that you might otherwise have had in your first term? Not at all. Every single commitment that we have made has been costed on the basis of the revenue that we're generating. For example, from not doing National's tax cuts, there was never any revenue being counted from the tax working group's outcomes, and there isn't now. OK. What taxes are going to be introduced by Labor in your first term if Colmar Brunton is right and you become government? So what we've said is we've got some big challenges, for instance, in improving our water quality. So we are going to be putting in the water royalty that we've talked about there. We have said that we need to sort out Auckland's transport woes and that Aucklanders know themselves that they've got to contribute to that. So there will be a regional fuel tax. We've also got to support our tourism infrastructure and our conservation infrastructure via an international visitor levy, not New Zealanders, but international visitors paying that. So those things that we've been campaigning on will definitely still be happening. As I might say, John, will be things to help try and fix the housing crisis. like the extension of the bright line test, like the ban on foreign buyers. We've got a big suite of policy here, some big changes that we're going to make. They're all still part of the picture.
Right, and what is absolutely out of the question now in terms of, let's look at that National Party attack ad, which came out yesterday, and it had the couple going into the residential home and the suggestion that there was going to be a capital gains tax. Obviously, you said that wasn't going to happen on the family home. There will be no capital gains tax on anything full stop in Labour's first term.
Correct.
There will be no land tax on anything full stop in Labour's first term.
Correct.
No increase to GST.
Correct.
Yeah, you've said that previously anyway. Do you think the Nats are looking at that? I know Stephen Joyce is saying absolutely no increase to GST. Do you believe him?
Well, they've got a bit of a track record there, don't they, John? Because that's exactly what John Key said going in, and then he promptly increased GST along with the 17 other tax increases that National have done.
You're just warming up for your debate with them. You're just warming up for your debate with them, aren't you?
Before we go on with it too far, John, I mean, the point here is that, you know, we've been upfront about what we're doing. What we have a problem with is the misrepresentation from National here. And it's time, you know, for an honest campaign from the National Party. Tell us what they're going to do about cleaning up our rivers. Tell us what they're going to do about Auckland transport. Tell us how they're going to support the tourism towns. We've said that. They're just throwing mud around rather than actually putting up their own ideas. Sounds like a government out of steam to me.
It sounds like somebody working very hard on the election campaign to me, Grant Robertson. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening, and enjoy your time with Stephen Joyce in that debate. Grant Robertson, Labour finance spokesperson. Just to recap, that One News Colmar-Brunton poll showed Labour up 1 to 44, National up 1 also to 40. Remember, they are ahead in TV3's Reid Research poll. In Colmar-Brunton, Labour is ahead again. Greens up 2, and that's really material to 7%. That puts them comfortably above the threshold. Reid Research had them at 4.9, didn't it? And 7 plus 44 is 51. So in this poll, quite different from the Reid Research, which came out from TV3, National and the Greens could govern. So much to discuss here. We're joined now by our political editor, Jane Patterson. Hi, Jane. Beaming in from Wellington. What do you make of this Colmar-Brunton?
Well, I think it shows that in this poll in particular, Labour is sustaining its lead over National. Clearly, of course, we had the Reid Research poll that showed a jump in support for National. I still think there is a huge amount of movement, and we've seen this throughout the election campaign, where voters are still not making up their mind. And I think an interesting point to make out of the Colmar-Brunton poll tonight, 14% of voters still undecided. Yeah. And they will very much be a target group that Labour is looking at with their change in approach on tax today.
Yes, that change in approach, which was a pointed but considered U-turn, is absolutely aimed at that 14%, isn't it?
Absolutely. And of course, any Labour voters or people who had indicated support for Labour who may have been spooked by National's continuing and strong attacks on, of course, Labour's tax plan. So it was attributed that on the Tuesday poll, with National getting a surge, that those attacks were starting to take hold. Labour would not have been wanting to take any chances with 7-8 days out from the election that they could really cement that within the constituency, because these attacks or these criticisms, people just have to hear them. They're not necessarily going to look that much further in them, and then they can make up their decision on that. So Labour, I think, really had no choice today but to make quite a bold move to try to counter that attack from National.
Yeah, really interesting to look at the Colmar-Brunton, which has Labour in front. Reid Research has National in front. We've discussed this. My understanding from pretty good National Party sources is that their internal polling has them in front too. I guess the poll of polls, Radio New Zealand's poll of polls, it has Labour and National really, really tight. Is that your sense of it?
It is, John, and that's why we have the poll of polls, because while all of these polls go up and down and we look at Colmar-Brunton and Reid Research, the poll of polls smooths out that average, and that's what we have to do, and we have to look at the trends. And that does have National and Labour pretty much neck and neck, and that's when you start obviously getting into all of the different combinations. And the last poll of polls had Labour, Greens and the Māori Party potentially able to form a government, but that is going to shift around. We will have another full update updated polar polls later on tonight and tomorrow morning to reflect this latest Colmar-Brunton poll, but things are still incredibly tight, and I would expect that it stays this way all the way into next week. Early voting, of course, another thing that's happened on Monday, where it's attracting record numbers of voters. But talking to the different parties, their feeling is that the people going to the polls to advance vote have already made up their minds. So they're the die-hard National supporters, they're the die-hard Labour supporters. So again, this is where those undecided or people teetering either way are going to become incredibly important in the coming days.
Jane Patterson, our political editor, thank you so much, Jane, joining us live out of Wellington. And of course, Morning Report will have the poll of polls tomorrow morning. It's 19 minutes past 6. The National Party can't guarantee that Landcorp farms it sells off won't end up in foreign hands. It's promising to sell around 100 state-owned farms to young farmers after they've worked the land for 5 to 10 years. But then what? Potentially. Siobhan Wilson has this report.
The National Party says it would direct Landcorp to lease some of its almost 140 farms to young farmers and give them the opportunity of buying them at market rates when they have built up enough capital. However, the National leader Bill English can't guarantee the farms won't end up in foreign hands.
The criteria effectively rule out foreign ownership because they have to be able to operate the farms themselves personally, not as an agent of a corporate.
The party's primary industry spokesperson, Nathan Guy, says there will also be nothing stopping the farmers from on-selling the land later.
In essence, if these young farmers have put their hard work, sweat and toil into these farms for 10 years, they have a real sense of ownership.
The Greens' Eugenie Sage says the plan is hugely risky and sounds like a repeat of the previous asset sales program,
where you had a promise that shares would be sold to New Zealanders. Instead, there was a giant transfer of wealth from New Zealanders to a few investors. That cost over $96 million for the asset sales program, and we've seen nearly $1 billion in foregone dividends.
Ms Sage argues Landcorp should remain in New Zealand hands.
The dairy supply payout crash meant that Landcorp's dividends weren't as good as they have been in the past. We need to protect the basis of production. There is no guarantee that these farms won't end up in the hands of overseas investors, particularly when our overseas ownership laws are so weak.
An agribusiness accountant based in Christchurch, Peter Alexander, supports the idea and says young couples would probably work the farms better than Landcorp. He says it's become increasingly hard for young families to become farm owners.
Outside of outright farm succession, that is mum and dad owning a farm, it's very hard for a young couple without a big lump of cash to get a start in farming today. It would be very hard. Not impossible, some have done it, but it would be very difficult.
Labour's associate spokesperson for primary industries, Meka Whaitiri, is questioning why such a plan has been announced just 8 days out from an election without consultation, particularly with Māori. She says as well as keeping a wary eye on land that is subject to treaty claims and under right of first refusal, the idea of balloting will also cause consternation. Returning Māori soldiers were largely excluded in previous ballots for land.
I think Māori will have a kind of snigger around balloting doesn't work for Māori. It never has. So what happens is obviously the majority will trump the minority, which is why we have to think if balloting is the way, then we need to make sure that Māori are part of the panel.
National says the 700 existing Landcorp staff will still be needed until the scheme gets off the ground. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Siobhan Wilson aho.
22 minutes past 6 on Checkpoint. It's an unlikely partnership, robots and classical music, but the two came together last night when Yumi, the humanoid robot, conducted the Lucca Philharmonic Orchestra in the Italian city of Pisa. I apologise to classical music fans if I've buggered all of that up. The BBC's James Reynolds went along.
Yumi the robot never drops its baton, nor does it ever get angry with its orchestra. Instead, it simply conducts without nerves or fuss. Yumi is an adapted assembly line robot. Its arms are programmed to copy the moves made by an old-fashioned human conductor, Andrea Colombini. The process took a while.
Long time
long time.
Good learner?
Good learner after a while, but at the very beginning we stopped 7 to 8 times, and every time stopping this lovely thing here means 25 to 30 minutes to reset it, and at the 8th time it happened, I was not pleased.
What's your relationship now?
I love him. I love him. I love him dearly. He's a very good pupil. He's able to do a very good job.
Are we all going to be replaced in the end by robots? Robot conductors, robot musicians, robot audience members?
Sorry, man is irreplaceable. We are man, and that's the reason why we are so good, because we have heart and brain.
It was designed by Ulrich Spieshofer, who runs the robotics company ABB.
I think it shows machine learning, it shows how we can do intuitive software-based learning with machines, but it does not show emotions, it does not show the perception of the original opinion and what the artist wanted to achieve. In terms of sensing the emotions of an audience, in terms of getting the spirit of the orchestra.
The big moment comes when Yumi conducts the tenor Andrea Bocelli. The original human conductor, Andrea Colombini, stands to one side, but he can't resist offering a few conducting gestures of his own. Backstage, well out of the robot's earshot, I asked the singer for his honest opinion.
It's a nice experience, very interesting, because I believe in the technology. I love technology. I use technology, so.
Would you choose a human conductor or a robot conductor?
No, of course, for now, and probably also in future, I will decide for a man, because the robot has not a will and is not artistic, of course. He takes the tempo from the man, so it's always better to have a good conductor.
Oh, beautiful music. James Reynolds with that report. James Reynolds does lovely stories from the BBC. Lots of emails coming in tonight. This one from Daniel. Was I pressing my button then? Muting my mic? No, I wasn't. I was on air. There's a button on my desk that we can use to mute ourselves so we can cough or ask what's coming up next during interviews and all those kinds of things. And I thought I was pressing it, but I wasn't. Daniel Dunn from Golden Bay. Hi, Daniel. Sent in, Dear John, at around 6:15, 6:18, you said National and the Greens could govern. I think you meant Labour and the Greens could govern. Indeed, Daniel, if I said National and the Greens, I didn't mean Labour and the Greens. However, if something quite extraordinary, unexpected happens, and National and the Greens do form a coalition government, you heard it here first on Checkpoint. Thank you, Daniel, who also said some lovely comments. We think that you are a wonderful listener. Lots coming in tonight on synthetics. This one from Greg sums up where people are with this. Legalise and regulate marijuana. The vast majority of those who've died taking synthetics and consequently costing the New Zealand taxpayer a small fortune would not seek out synthetics if they could access marijuana legally. The most salient point, though, is by legalising marijuana, the demand and market for these horrific unknown synthetics would dwindle so low that the peddlers of these synthetics would find it completely economically unviable to run the risk to push these products. Problem solved, and the revenues and employment opportunities made available from legal marijuana industry could be used to give the moral right-wingers a massive tax cut, not to mention more dollars available for the whole suite of social, health and educational issues. Why is this country so slow on this issue? Thank you, Greg. We do get a lot of feedback along those lines. It's really interesting how many of you are contacting us with those suggestions. Let's go to a pretty remarkable story about IS, the brides of the Islamic State group, the women who travelled with their jihadist husbands or journeyed alone to be wed in Iraq and Syria, are presenting authorities with an extraordinary dilemma. More than 1,000 women and children, the families of suspected IS foreign fighters, are being held in a camp south of Mosul as Iraqi officials and foreign diplomats scramble to simply identify them. The ABC's Matt Brown has this report.
Before the Islamic State group lost control of its stronghold of Mosul, many of its members fled to the city of Tal Afar, which has been an insurgent hotspot for more than a decade. And when it fell, large numbers of foreign fighters surrendered rather than fight to the death. They have disappeared into Iraq's opaque security system, but their wives and children are being held at a camp in the desert south of Mosul. Melanie Markham from the Norwegian Refugee Council.
It's a very difficult situation and it's to a large degree unprecedented. The Iraqis either return to their homes or they move on to displacement camps. But because these people are foreign nationals, it's uncertain whether they'll be repatriated or, if not, what happens to them if they stay in the country.
The women reflect the global pull of the IS project.
There are people from other Middle Eastern countries, certainly Central Asia, Russia, a large number of Turkish nationals, and people from as far away as the Caribbean.
While fighting for IS can be punished in Iraq with the death penalty, the women and children aren't officially viewed the same way. But they're also not free to leave. The NRC says they're being held at a militarised site in de facto detention.
The site is designed only to accommodate people for 2 or 3 days. Some people have been there since the 30th of August, and we don't know when they're going to move on. We're providing for their basic needs, so food, water, shelter. And I know that there are efforts being made by various governments to negotiate about the status of their nationals, but there's no certainty. There's no certainty as when the situation will be resolved and if, in fact, it will be resolved for all of the people there.
While some of the women defend the rule of IS, Iraqi officials say others didn't know they were travelling to the so-called caliphate, and a large number simply had no say in it at all.
About 2/3 of the people in this emergency site are actually children. So it's a very difficult and delicate situation, and really what they need is to be protected and their human rights upheld throughout this process.
It's just the start of what's sure to be a long and fraught attempt to untangle a complex web linking family life and global jihad.
Yes, that is an extraordinary situation. That's the ABC's Matt Brown ending Checkpoint for tonight. Thank you for being with us. On behalf of our wonderful team, we'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The latest One News Colmar Brunton poll has the Labour Party back on top with 44% compared to National's 40%. The Waikato DHB says a series of issues were involved in the tragic death of a baby during a birth a year ago. Winston Peters calls for an inquiry into the National MP Jian Yang to determine whether he still has links to Chinese military intelligence. And Labour has changed its approach to parts of its tax policy. Our next news and weather is at 7.
New Horizons takes a trip this week on the Grizzly Bear Magic Sonic Carpet, venturing into the group's superb new album, Painted Ruins. Instead of moving, stared into the wall. Join me, William Dart, for New Horizons.